Greetings all. Dr. Raphael X here with another video with my returning special guest, Mr. Matthew Hoffman, who wrote a very interesting article which we're going to analyze today. So please subscribe, click on the like button, notifications button, all that good stuff. Share this video, leave a comment, and before anything else, let us begin with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, well, Matthew, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you very much for having me, Raphael. Good
Yeah,
to see you.
good to see you too. So Matthew wrote a very interesting article for Crisis Magazine, and it's the title is Pope Francis's Condemnation of Gaza Genocide Reflects Traditional Catholic Doctrine. And this is interesting because right from the get-go, a lot of people, and you mentioned this in your article, this is just kind of right at the beginning, they judge Pope Francis to be leftist automatically. And I do think there's some merit in saying that Pope Francis, in many aspects, transcends these categories, right, of left and right. Actually, something he's a Peronist, which is more complicated and that's a dictatorial, social justice, what have you. But
Yeah,
um,
I agree, though. I think that's the best adjective to describe him as Peronist.
to some
Yeah.
people, yes, but yeah, exactly. And but here it's interesting here that it's not simply a leftist social justice loving position, but rather it's as a position rooted in truth and in fact. And I just want to say, and I'll turn it over to you to kind of give us your first insights in the article, kind of why you wrote this. I think the Christian position, and we are talking about this before, is more impartial in judging the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and maybe in this instance, even though this instance is more clear what's going on, because there is a lot of propaganda on both sides. The Israeli side, there's a lot of propaganda, um, and there's some Muslim propaganda too with the Palestinian conflict that focus on both sides. But here, it seems not to be the case so much. It seems to be more clear cut. So, if you any preliminary thoughts, you want to get right into it, or why'd you write the article? And yeah, take it away.
Sure. Well, yeah. So the thrust of the article is that Pope Francis's his condemnations of Israeli, you could say, military activity in Gaza, this massive incursion into Gaza that's just been going on for really about a year and a half now, which are very strong condemnations. He uses the word genocide. That these condemnations are very correct. They're very much in keeping with Catholic moral teaching, specifically about just war, and just in general with our obligations to behave in a charitable manner, or the obligation of charity to our fellow man, as well as justice, and that this is nothing unprecedented in the church's history. John Paul II, as I point out in the article, also condemned the abusive mistreatment of the Palestinians well before anything was going on in Gaza of this scale. And there's a simple reason for that, and that is that the Palestinians have been victims of terrible injustice since 1948, since the founding of the State of Israel. And their story is not understood in the Western media and in Western societies, particularly in the United States, probably more than anywhere else in the United States, because of the massive propaganda in favor of Zionism and in favor defending the State of Israel, and the massive power, the great power of the Israeli lobby in the United States. So most Americans have a completely distorted understanding of what's been going on over there for so long. And so when they hear that Pope Francis is saying this is a genocide, or in fact, actually, he doesn't say that it's a genocide. He says that the question of whether it is or not should be studied. But as I point out in my article, it's not really that controversial among jurists and experts on international law. Genocide is not a vague term. It's a term that's defined in international law through treaties conventions that have been signed both by the United States and Israel. And there's not really any question that this is genocidal activity that Israel is engaged in Gaza. And I wanted to point this out at the same time, making clear that I'm not doing this to defend some kind of perhaps leftist or, like you said, Peronist ideological position that the Pope might have on other issues, or what his personal motives are for being concerned about this. Perhaps he sees it as simply part of a broader ideological agenda that he identifies with other causes. I don't know, but in fact, his position is extremely well founded in church teaching. And it's appropriate to not only ask the question of whether this is a genocide or not, but to say that it's a genocide and to condemn it.
Right.
And that's my point in the article, and I think I document this very, very well. And again, I'm saying this not to associate myself with other things that Pope Francis has done. I think that he's been quite probably the worst pope in history. I don't like to have to say that, but I just think that that's appropriate to say about him, that he's been a terrible pope. And but just because of that doesn't mean we should just react in some kind of knee-jerk way and reject everything that he says. And in fact, it's really good that he's been one of the well, he's an eminent leader in Europe who has been willing to speak out rather forcefully about this. Not as forcefully as I would hope he would, but rather forcefully when so many are either more timid about it or just totally silent, or even making excuses for what Israel has been doing in Gaza.
Right, right. And what's interesting, I think the beef Pope Francis has with the US, I think he's kind of sees the US as like a neocon Christianity, as you kind of allude to in your article. And there is some truth to that. The so-called traditional Catholics are not necessarily neocons. In a sense, this neo-conservative Christianity kind of allies, believes in like a Christian Zionism, which is actually a Catholic heresy. So why is it's kind of like what's going on with this neoconservative kind of faction in the U.S.? It seems like it's behind the almost like the veiling of this information. It's strange because in the media you do have a pro-Islamic sentiment, like an Islamophiliac, but then you also have kind of like a pervasive neocon Christian Zionism also veiling the atrocities of Israel. So what kind is going on? So there's a pro-Israel sentiment, but at the same time there's an anti-Israel sentiment in the media. So I don't know, kind of is the propaganda on both sides, or is it outweighed by one side?
Well, yeah, when one begins to investigate this question, this matter, which is not just a matter of October 7th, it's the date that they keep repeating over and over again. We're never supposed to forget what was done by the leadership of Hamas, its forces on October the 7th, 2023. But just in general, this issue, the whole issue of Zionism itself, the founding of the State of Israel, the history of the relationship with the Palestinian Arabs and so on. If one doesn't know anything about it, one might go into the thing thinking that, well, there's grievances on both sides. These are people who can't get along, and right. But that is not, in fact, actually the case. The State of Israel is a colonialist project, without any doubt. Essentially begun by Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, but supported heavily by the so-called Christian Zionists, which, as you point out, Christian Zionism is a Protestant error, if not a flat-out heresy. I don't know if I could prove that it's a heresy that it denies a defined dogma, but it's so clearly against the scriptures, I would say, and the traditional teachings of the Catholic Church that it might as well be a heresy. It's not inappropriate, I think, to call it a heresy. And that's the idea that the Jewish people have a perpetual right to what we came to know as the Holy Land. And it's also been called Palestine for a very, very long time. By the way, you always hear that, oh, Palestine, that's a new thing, and that was just created recently, or that idea just came into being recently. No, it's the word comes from the word Philistia, which was used not only to refer to the area populated by the Philistines, which, by the way, was Gaza. It's where Gaza is now. That's where Philistia was, but actually to the whole area, and that's going back to ancient Egypt. Around the same time that the ancient Egyptians began to make reference to Israel, they were also talking about Philistia. So Palestine is just an application. It is just a kind of a variation on the word Philistia. So it's an ancient term. Also, Canaan is also a term used even more often in the Bible than Israel for the land. But in any case, it's very clear in the scriptures and in the traditional teaching of the church that the one who is to reestablish the kingdom of Israel, which was destroyed because the ancient Israelites violated the covenant, and God told them that the land was not theirs. In Deuteronomy 22, he says, the land is mine, and you are sojourners and tenants on my land. And he says, if you misbehave, if you violate my covenant, the land will vomit you out. And he ultimately sends the Assyrians and the Babylonians to destroy the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah and to take the people into exile. And then there's a partial return to Judah and a restoration of the temple. But Jesus himself says in the parable of the tenants what's going to happen to the majority of Jews who reject him, which is that they will be replaced. Literally, that's the word replaced in the parable of the tenants. The temple will be destroyed, he tells us, and elsewhere. Why? Because they reject the Messiah. So they reject the covenant again. And only the Messiah can restore the kingdom of Israel. And in fact, the Messiah has restored the kingdom of Israel, because the kingdom of Israel is not Benjamin Netanyahu. The kingdom of Israel is Jesus Christ, and the kingdom of Israel is Jesus Christ, and the kingdom of Israel is the Catholic Church. And so this is it makes no sense to claim that those who have rejected Jesus and partake of this tradition of the Pharisees, which is when Jesus is condemning the Jews in the scripture, it keeps using that phrase, the Jews, he's actually particularly talking about the scribes and the Pharisees. But the majority of Jews who rejected Jesus, who ultimately didn't accept him for one reason or another, maybe they just didn't know about him, but they ended up under the tutelage of the Pharisees, who wrote the Talmud, and have continued this tradition of doctrine that Jesus utterly condemned. And there's no way that they would have a right to this land. The land, the kingdom of Israel goes beyond any land. It is something that is in heaven. It is on earth. It is it's the kingdom that the old kingdom of Israel meant to foreshadow, to prefigure. And so it's ridiculous to say that there's any kind of divine right to this land. But even worse is the fact that this land, that this country was founded on the massive terroristic ethnic cleansing of the area of all of its inhabitants, practically, not all, but the vast majority of the Palestinian Arab inhabitants. And we keep, by the way, I want to mention this, Muslims, right? We think, oh, they're Muslims. No, most of them are Muslims, but there's a substantial minority that are Christians. What is that minority? Well, originally it was maybe somewhere about 12, 13, 14%. And so in 1948, by the way, I've lost your audio. I do not hear you.
Oh, you know?
Yes, I hear you now.
Okay.
Great. Okay.
I was just silent, like a ninja.
Okay. It looked like you were speaking. I didn't hear you.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and so in 1948, there is a secular basis for them having a state there. There was a massive influx in the Zionist movement that Jews began in the 1890s, around that time. And that was already been supported for centuries by Protestants. They had been talking about the Jews returning to the Holy Land and having reestablishing the kingdom of Israel there. Like I say, not compatible with the scriptures, not compatible with Catholic teaching. And that those two movements dovetailed, and Christian Zionists supported this. So this is a project that, when I talk about Zionists, I'm not just talking about Jews. But when they established the state of Israel, they did so. They were able to have a legal basis for it because Britain, which had a mandate over Palestine, over the area known as Palestine after the end of the First World War, they gained this area. They gained control of this area, Palestine and other areas that had been part of the Ottoman Empire. They no longer wished to administer it, and they didn't really favor Zionism, but Americans did, and some Brits did as well. Some very wealthy, powerful British citizens, including the Rothschild family, by the way. It's not some dark rumor or something. They were very public about it. They helped bankroll it. And so they turned it over to the United Nations, and the United Nations proposed this plan in which Jews, even though they were only 33% of the people there, and most of them were recent refugees, okay, virtually all of them actually had come only in the last few years or decades from Europe. They were only 33%, but they would get 55% of the land under their sovereignty, under their sovereign ethnic state is Israel, and then the Palestinian Arabs would get the rest of it, even though they were 65% roughly. They were going to only get 45% of the land. But in any case, what people don't know is that the land, when we talk about the land and sovereignty, it just means that there would be an ethnic state there. But the Palestinians living in the boundaries of Israel would be able to live in their homes and live and continue to practice their religion. They had every right to stay there. I mean, it's their private property. These are people living there. If there's a new government, they don't just lose their property and lose their residency in an area that they've been living in for thousands of years, literally thousands of years. So what happened is in 1947, late 47 and 1948, once this partition plan was announced in 1947, all these Israeli, I think they can only be called death squads, terrorist outfits, the Haganah, the Lehi, as they were called, the Stone Gang, these different groups, which were functionally terrorist groups. They had already blown up the King David Hotel and killed all these people to drive the English out. They assassinated people constantly. They went into all these Palestinian villages and they committed mass murder in these villages. And they killed hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians. And the Palestinians in terror fled. How many? The vast majority of them, about 700 to 750,000, including 90,000 Christians. And they fled to the West Bank and to Gaza principally, and to East Jerusalem. And from there, they have essentially been in what we can only call large-scale concentration camps. These giant refugee camps where they are kept under, where they don't have any of their own sovereignty or rights. And just to add this, in 1967, Israel attacked its Arab neighbors. Okay. By the way, in 1948, the Arabs did invade when they declared the state of Israel, but it was to defend the Palestinians. In fact, Jordan, which was one of the two principal attackers, didn't really attack the state of Israel itself. They just went in to defend the West Bank so that Israel couldn't grab that. And by the way, in 1948, Israel didn't take 55% of the land. They took 78% of the land. So now, even though they went way beyond their mandate, they terrorized the population in leaving. They violated the partition plan, completely violated it from the beginning, never intended to obey it at all. And they pushed these people into refugee camps. Now they're living there. In 1967, Israel then attacks its Arab neighbors. Its Arab neighbors didn't attack them. They attacked their Arab neighbors, and they invaded the West Bank and Gaza, and they grabbed these areas. And they gradually transformed them into literally into giant concentration camps under permanent military dictatorship that Palestinian Arabs, including the Christians, the 90,000 Christians that grew to a much larger number, had to live under day in, day out, which meant that they could become arrested in the middle of the night, taken off, which is really kidnapping. It's state-sponsored kidnapping. At any one time, the state of Israel has thousands of Palestinian Arabs in what they call detention, which is where they grab them. They just come into their home, they take them away, children included as young as 12, and they take them off to what they call detention, which is just kidnapping and keeping them in these prisons, and they torture them. They torture children. Okay, and this is the regime people live under 24 hours a day. They live behind barbed wire. They are constantly moving from, if they need to move to go to a hospital, they have to pass through all these checkpoints where they won't let them pass for hours while they're bleeding to death. I mean, when you find out the cruelty, the barbarism, and the way they've been continuously treated after being robbed of their lands that were theirs, that really were authentically theirs, it's just mind-boggling. And Gaza has just been another phase of this. So, I mean, I wanted to say that just to give some context before we even go on to what's happening in Gaza now, because Israel has been brutalizing, terrorizing, torturing, raping, and murdering Palestinians for 76 years, continuously. And the average American has no idea about this, and they think that Palestinians are crazed Muslim fanatics who are racist against Jews and hate them. which is ridiculous because, in fact, actually Jews lived among Muslims for thousands of years, mostly in total peace, and in fact, really probably had an easier time among them than they did in Christendom. And all of this conflict only began recently, and it's not really fundamentally even religious. It's actually more nationalist.
Right.
It's actually had more of a nationalist conflict. The religious element was actually created by Israel, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I didn't know if you wanted to ask me any follow ups
Yeah,
to
yeah,
this.
no, that's really interesting. I actually have a book. I forget the name of the name of the book, but it's a Jewish witness who lived among the Palestinian people, and she's explaining a lot of these things that you're saying. That in the middle of the night they would just take family members, young boys, young girls, and parents too, and they would bring them into camps for torturing. So almost word for word what you're saying. I read it recently in
Mm-hmm.
preparation for our interview, but just going to kind of like that Jewish view. Another point which you mentioned that Jewish view is very Pelagianist, kind of like fulfilling the law, salvation through kind of these works, right? That's why Judaism kind of has fallen into like a Talmudism, you can say, in a sense, where this is what I follow, this is what I do, I save myself. There's a small, I don't know if you're familiar with his video with Netanyahu, and he's talking to a very prominent religious leader, and the religious leader tells him, you hasten the coming of the Messiah. You hasten it. So that Pelagianist view is that they can actually affect, and there's some truth to that in a sense. Obviously, God comes when He wants, but he's supposed to hasten the coming of the Mashiach, right? Which some Jews don't even believe in anymore. But basically, this Pelagianist view, and I think a lot of these actions are geared towards that. But I don't know if you want to comment on that. But turning towards the Christians, this is how Pope Francis, and you mentioned this in your article, this is how he gets his information. Which, if you want to elaborate a little bit on that, how were the Christians suffering in this particular instance, and what's happening now in Gaza? What's going on with Christians? And all right,
Yes, well, what Pope Francis is talking about, particularly with regard to Christians in Gaza at this time, as I mentioned, Christians have been victimized among the Palestinians, Christian Arabs, all through this 76-year period. Maybe we're even down on 77 years since 1948. But particularly in Gaza, there is a Catholic church in Gaza, Catholic parish in Gaza, Holy Family. There are hundreds, there may be even a little bit more than 1,000 Christians in Gaza. The exact number I'm not remembering right now, and we don't know how many are left now. But that have taken shelter in this parish, which is, by the way, in northern Gaza. And at the very beginning of this Israeli attack on the people of Gaza, following October 6th, which I think we probably should discuss that at some point, what actually happened on October 6th and what its context was. But they attacked the parish itself. They destroyed a place that they were using to take care of disabled people, which is what they have. They have the special kind of apostolate, I guess you could say, where they have nuns there taking care of disabled people, or they destroyed that or part of that. And then they started shooting people in the compound within the parish itself. Now, these are not people who are shooting at them. These are just civilians, and in fact, elderly women. So they shot an elderly woman. And when I say they shot her, I don't mean a stray bullet hit her. I mean snipers shot her. And there's no question that snipers did. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem issued a public statement to this effect, that they had been deliberately targeted. This elderly woman, imagine an old lady inside of a compound, inside of this church area, this little area, it's like between the church and these other buildings that they use. And she was just outside for just a moment, and they shot her. And so she goes down. Then her daughter, who's also somewhat elderly, because her daughter, this woman was rather elderly, goes out to try to save her. They shoot her too. And so they're both lying out there. And so eventually, and they end up shooting others, again, Israeli snipers. And they end up shooting others there. So they deliberately just massacred and shot Christians. But this isn't anything new, because their point is to ethnically cleanse the last remaining parts of Palestine completely by making those areas unlivable and by suppressing the population. So throughout, as I point out in the article, this isn't anything surprising because throughout Gaza, during this whole incursion, the IDF, the so-called Israeli Defense Forces, which they really shouldn't be called that, but it's just part of their propaganda. They're defense forces. No, they're not. It's a terrorist outfit for a terrorist state. I don't like to have to say that, but that's just what it is. They have been putting sniper bullets into the heads of children all over Gaza. And I'm not the one who's just saying this. Doctors, foreign doctors, Jewish foreign doctors who are in these hospitals. I saw an interview with a Jewish doctor who has been doing sort of charitable work all around the world for 20 years. He says, I've never seen killing of civilians on this scale until I went to Gaza and was working in one of these hospitals. And they said, well, a lot of them children. He says essentially all of them were children. And he said over and over again, children with sniper bullets in their heads and in their chests. And so Pope Francis, anyway, has cried out about this because he knows what happened in Holy Family Parish, and he knows that this is going on all over Gaza. But people are terrified to say it because there's this just massive, constant propaganda effort that seeks to convince people that if they speak out against this incredible, astounding, Nazi-like behavior on by the state of Israel, this genocidal cruelty, these war crimes beyond description, that they will be called an anti-Semite. They will be told that there's some lying, even though the evidence is extremely good for all of this. Very impartial witnesses have told us that this is happening, and there's photographic evidence, and we can see that Gaza has been totally destroyed. And the vast majority of those who died are women and children. But they will try to smear you, intimidate you, and all the rest. And I want to clarify how that came about. In part, it's because the Zionist movement itself, I wanted to mention this. The Zionist movement, when we talk about Talmudism and all the rest, yes, there is now a Zionist Talmudism. It's this sort of horrible hybrid beast. But before that, the Zionist movement was an anti-rabbinical secularist movement by Jews who were actually trying to sort of throw off the chains of rabbinical Judaism in some way. And they were atheists who founded the state of Israel. The first prime minister was essentially an atheist, he didn't believe in the Jewish religion at all, didn't celebrate any holidays, was not a believer in that. And I think he said he might have believed in some kind of first mover God, but other than that, nothing, right? And in some cases, he was just characterized as an atheist. I mean, essentially, these were atheists. But what happened is, they were atheist socialists, by the way. And Stalin's regime actually helped to give them the weapons in 1948 to do what they did, by the way. They were initially supported by Soviet Russia. Yeah. Also by the United States, though. That was one of the few cases where Soviet Russia and the United States came together to support all of this. But after that, what happened is over time, their movement, by the way, was utterly condemned by the rabbis. In fact, the founder, I'm forgetting his name suddenly, but the founder of the Zionist movement, Theodor Herzl, was actually driven out of Austria-Hungary by rabbis when he tried to create the first Zionist Congress. And he had to flee to Switzerland to organize this first meeting of Zionism because the rabbis of the world were virtually universally opposed to this project, utterly opposed. But Zionism was initially imposed upon Jews by wealthy, powerful Jews who had become part of the movement. Very, very wealthy, powerful Jews ended up using their own kind of mafia-like tactics to impose Zionism, to impose sort of Zionist ideology on Jews in general worldwide, and also to induce Arab states to expel their Jewish populations so that they could have even more, a bigger population in Israel. And so over time, what happened is Jews, there began to exist, and that rabbi you're mentioning, whose name, I'm forgetting his name, but that rabbi you were mentioning is sort of like the chief rabbi of this Zionist kind of Talmudism. He then started to create this Talmudism Talmudic Judaism that would endorse the state of Israel and support the state of Israel. And so this is a new thing because it was born against it. In fact, the Talmud has this concept of the three oaths. I don't know if you've heard of that. Have you heard of the three oaths
I
that God supposedly?
no, enlighten
Yeah,
me.
the three oaths that God imposed upon mankind regarding the Jewish people. And one of them is that the Jews were condemned to live without state. They could individually live in the Holy Land, but they were not allowed to return as a group to try to reestablish the kingdom of Israel. Only the Messiah could do that. And that's the interesting thing. That's where the Talmud agrees with Christianity. Only the Messiah can restore the kingdom of Israel. Christianity says that too. And of course, we believe Jesus already did, and that this kingdom is in a development towards its ultimate perfection, but it exists in heaven and on earth in the church and so on. But they believe it hasn't come yet. And so they said we were not to return. And why did they say that they had to be without a state and live among the nations of the earth under their sovereignty? Because they had sinned against God and against the covenant. They actually held that. Now, they did not agree that it was because they had killed Jesus, but they did believe it was because of this. So, but now a new Talmudic Judaism has come into being that takes the worst elements of the Talmud, because the Talmud has terrible elements in it, and it combines it with this vicious, racist, cruel, colonialist, Zionist kind of ideology to make this, monstrous thing, this monstrous new religion that even is contrary to the old Talmudic religion. And so that's the situation we're sort of in with that. And they've done such a propaganda job and convinced the world that they represent Jews everywhere, that they are Judaism, which is not true. Jews in the United States, as I point out in my article, increasingly have condemned the state of Israel, what they're doing in Gaza, and very large numbers are anti-Zionist, and actually always have been. There have always been a decent number of them who are anti-Zionist, including Talmudic Jews who never got involved in this in Zionism. They're some of the strongest protesters against the state of Israel, and they say these are people. I mean, these are the Hasidic Jews that wear the hats, and the beard and all of that. They are the strongest opponents of the state of Israel out there. They say that they want the peaceful dismantling of the state of Israel, and they even fly the Palestinian flag. That is how in their neighborhoods. Yeah, in both by the way, both in the United States, in Britain, but also in Israel itself, in areas under Israeli control, there are neighborhoods of these Hasidic, they call them the ultra Orthodox,
Right.
that are expressly anti-Zionist. They have anti-Zionist graffiti all over their walls, and they even have like the colors of the Palestinian flag in their neighborhoods. And they get beaten up by Israeli police when they protest against Israel. So people have been lied to so much about this. It's just unreal. But anyway, that's I'm sorry to get off on that, but I wanted to give just some more context to all of this
No, 'cause you would
before we
think
conclude.
that, Zionism kind of just in its beginnings would be motivated by a religious ideal. You would think with the Promised Land going back to that land which they had um, as a religious people, but it's not. It's interesting how the founders were basically communists and atheists for that reason. So it's later on it took on this deformed religious sense, which backed by Protestantism in a distorted and wrong way, of course, Christian Zionism or the religious Zionism that's Jews religiously justifying their at all costs, really, the ends justifying the means, them being there. So that's really fascinating. But really, one of the principles of just war is proportionality, because there's Catholic doctrine,
Absolutely. Mhm.
proportionality. So one thing in your article that you mentioned, and this is why Pope Francis is right in condemning what's going on. Now, you said there's a lot of allusion to October 6th, a lot of allusion to October 6th, October 6th, right? Or October 7th.
It's October 7th. Yeah.
It's October 7th. October 7th, yes. Um, so there's a lot of allusion to that, but okay, that was bad, of course. We don't deny that. But the response to that is such a disproportionality. And you mentioned in your article, which I've heard before someone else argue, that there have been more tons of bombs dropped on Gaza than was dropped by all the allies on Nazi Germany at that time. So, and it's more destructive than the atomic bomb dropped in Japan. Right? I don't know if both atomic bombs, I think, are is mentioning one. I don't know, but either way,
Yeah.
what a disproportionality. If you want to kind of elaborate on that.
Yeah, the Japanese are so horrified because, of course, they're the sort of the caretakers of the memory of those who died at the as a result of the atomic bombings of Japan, which, by the way, were criminal acts by the United States, and that's again something that
For sure.
yeah, most Catholics don't understand is that what the United States did against its own enemies in World War II, although of course their enemies were also doing things they shouldn't have done, but they were criminal. I mean, you can't drop an atomic bomb on an entire city full of people and just
Yeah.
right on the grounds that somehow well, that's the only way to get them to give up. I can terrorize and murder innocent people, civilians, non-combatants to do this. And not just by the way, not just the atomic bombings, but the fire bombings. Well, I think we killed 100,000 Japanese in just in one night in one of the fire bombings of Japan with these incendiary bombs that were just designed to set homes on fire. You know, you want to talk about people being thrown into ovens. We turned huge parts of Japan into giant ovens and roasted the people alive. That's what we did. So Americans are numbed to this, and so yeah. So the idea is right. Well, they attacked Israel, so now Israel can attack them, and that means they can do whatever they want. If there's one, all they have to do is claim, oh, there's one Hamas person here, or we think there is one, and so we'll destroy this entire school. We'll destroy this hospital. We'll take the hospital staff out of the hospital and march them in the cold, strip them down practically naked in the cold, and sort of death march them out of the hospital and take them off to be tortured. We can do anything we want. It's war. War just lets you. War. There's no morality in war. But Catholic just war theory, of course, not just war. I should say theory. Catholic just war doctrine, which is really just. A specific application of just the way we justly interact with people in general, more general understanding of justice, tells us, of course, we can't do these things. The Catholic Church has been condemning them, condemning these kinds of acts in formal documents since the Middle Ages, for example, the peace of God and the truce of God that was set up in the Middle Ages. But there have been many different conventions and regulations that have been issued in the century since, even by the secular states of European nations, they just condemn this kind of thing. And by the way, I want to just give some context about October. Mm-hmm. What was it? Now I am forgetting if it's October the 6th or 7th. I don't know why. I think it's October the 7th, but anyway, it went on for several days, right? So, what happened in October of 2023 was just one iteration of what's been going on over and over again between the Palestinians who are living in Gaza, Gaza is literally a giant concentration camp. It is an area smaller than Manhattan, I believe, around the size of Manhattan, that is just surrounded by giant walls and barbed wire and military bases. And the people are kept half-starved under a continuous siege. 9 years before the attacks in 2023 that Hamas carried out, the state of Israel, virtually unprovoked, on the slightest provocation, launched something called Operation Protective Edge. And in the space of 50 days, they killed double the number of civilians that Hamas killed in October of 2023, including hundreds of children. So this happens, and there's no memory of this. Nobody can remember Operation Protective Edge and the slaughter of the Palestinians that occurred at this time. Just a few years after that, from like about 2018 to 2019, there was this giant, massive protest that was organized by the Palestinians of Gaza, in which they went up close to the fence and protested against their abuse and mistreatment. Just by going up to the fence, they got shot. Dozens of children were shot. People in wheelchairs who were out there to protest were shot by Israeli snipers for protesting against being kept in a concentration camp and kept half-starved under continuous siege and not having employment, essentially just not having normal lives at all, right? And this is after their lands were stolen. When they burst out in October and did these things, they were imitating what the Israelis have done to them over and over again. Does that justify it? No, it doesn't justify directly, deliberately killing a civilian and a non-combatant. Of course, it doesn't. Um, but many of the stories, by the way, that we were told about what happened on that day were false. Children were not beheaded. They were not thrown into ovens. There were children who died. A couple of babies died, but it's generally agreed that they were not targeted, that they died in crossfire. And a total of about 30 or 40 people under the age of 18, so they were children, it's appropriate to say that, did die. They did go into these kibbutzes and they shot the civilians in the kibbutzes. And that was wrong. I'm not saying that that was okay. But if we're going to condemn Hamas for what they did, and we should condemn them insofar as they did that, although any attacks that they might have made on their captors who were armed, I think, I don't condemn that. I've said that before. I'm not going to condemn that at all. I mean, these people they're being abused and they're kept in a giant prison camp. If they fought back against, it's like the people in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto rising up against their captors. Is that a terrorist act? No, that part isn't. But if we're going to condemn what Hamas did, then we must condemn Israel many, many times more, because Israel has been doing that for decades and now is doing it in Gaza on a scale that is unreal. If it's not okay for Hamas to kill civilians in their own attacks on Israel, could it be possibly okay for Israel to do this to people who they're not really in a war with, by the way? There's no war here. It's not a war when you're just running around with an army against people with some rifles, a few people with rifles. They're popping out here and there and shooting at you, and you're dropping 2,000-pound bombs on them and planting TNT and destroying their homes after you've depopulated their areas. That is not a war. It's just an organized massacre. Actually, not even very well organized, but it's just a mass murder. And I don't even think it qualifies as a war. So even talking about war crimes in a certain way is just not even appropriate. It's so bad. And by the way, the United States is paying for all of this. We are financing it. We finance the Israeli military, and all of this is happening because we refuse to tell them to stop and refused to. We keep sending them the weapons that they need and the funding that they need. They're a giant welfare state that is funded by the United States continuously, and so I think people need to know about that.
Yeah, it's fun. What's interesting is that the government seems to fear, and rightly so, the influence of other, of governments from other countries. But there's no pervasive fear of Israeli influence. How it's automatically assumed, kind of this like the neocon mentality that the Israeli and American are like they just match in interests automatically, which is kind of strange. But you do
Yeah.
mention in your article too how really the international criminal courts have attempted to prosecute it, or have actually prosecuted, I don't remember, Netanyahu, and it was actually thwarted, I believe. Trump retaliated against. He's actually going through a scandal from the allegations of, I think it's Khan, some British lawyer. You mentioned him here, Karim Khan. He was the chief prosecutor of ICC, the International Criminal Court, and he wanted to go. He was trying to prosecute Netanyahu precisely for this genocide, ultimately, which seems to be what it is. So it's yeah. So how do you see this playing out on the international scale? What's kind of going on now, or what has happened in the past? Is kind of
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, the International Criminal Court and other international institutions that are charged with overseeing issues of human rights on an international scale and making judgments about them, they have for years been investigating Israel and condemning what Israel has done. And Israel responded to the International Criminal Court's attempts to investigate them and to perhaps hold them accountable by actually intimidating. And we now know that they have actually sent messages from the Mossad to try to intimidate the officials of the International Criminal Court. So this is what I'm saying. The Zionists are a mafia. They always were a mafia, and they continue to function now as a global mafia. And they literally have been caught doing this. And so finally, the International Criminal Court received charges from their chief prosecutor of war crimes against Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, who is no longer, he's been removed, but Benjamin Netanyahu is still in power. And it took many, many months, but they finally issued an arrest warrant for him so that they could put him on trial. So there is an international arrest warrant that all the signatories, all those who are sort of members of the International Criminal Court system around the world, which include a lot of European states and other states outside of Europe, they're obligated to arrest him if he comes on their soil because he has been accused of war crimes. Also, the World Court, the International Court of Justice, already examined the case brought to them by South Africa about Israel committing genocide, and they ruled that it was plausible. The case that they had made that Israel was committing genocide was plausible, and that they were going to ultimately issue a verdict, but that they haven't issued a final verdict on it. But they told Israel, stop doing anything that is genocidal there. And of course, Israel just ignores it, laughs, says there's nothing genocidal about killing. What we know is that at least 60,000 people have been directly killed, but the number is actually almost certainly, and I point this out, that there's a study by the British journal Lancet that says if we take normal multiples that we apply to combat zones like this, where civilians are being killed directly, and we take the number of direct deaths, and then we multiply that by the normal multiples that actually occur in these kinds of situations, we would have to conclude that close to 200,000, and this was, by the way, about almost a year ago that they made this statement, but that at that time, that the death toll had reached maybe close to about 180, 190,000 people. It's well above 200,000 now that are dead, out of almost certainly on those calculations there. So yeah, and I point out in the article too, numerous jurists and experts on the Holocaust, including Jewish Holocaust scholars in Israel, have said Gaza is a genocide. This is like the Holocaust. This is similar. It's a genocide, you know. So these are Jewish scholars in the United States and even in Israel saying this is a genocide.
Even the organizations you mentioned that were founded by Jews, I believe, like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, they say, have it here. I believe they were founded by Jews. You mentioned them. Human rights outfits that have tended to downplay Israel atrocities in the past are now calling the country's Gaza incursion a genocide. So that's
yeah. I think Jews were involved in the founding of those groups. I don't know if it was exclusively Jews. Actually, Catholics originally were especially involved in Amnesty International, by the way. Yeah, but unfortunately, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch both now say it's a human right to murder your unborn child. So, which is something they did not do for a very long time. But they do now, so they're somewhat discredited, obviously. But these groups have been very hesitant to make strong condemnations of Israel in the past because, yes, of the Zionist influence over them. Because, yes, I'm sure that there are large numbers of Jews there. But it's not just that they're Jews. It's just the influence of Zionism in general and the constant complaints that they're biased, that they're in league with Hamas or something. Well, they finally both said this is a genocide. I mean, it's a genocide. In South Africa, the reason South Africa took that case to the International Court of Justice is because, you know, Israel, during the whole apartheid period, and apartheid, by the way, was very brutal in South Africa. It was a racist system in which blacks had no rights. That was very similar to the way Palestinians are treated on the West Bank and in Gaza, but actually maybe not as bad. In fact, that's what South Africans have said. They've said, wow, this seems worse to us than the way we were treated. But what Israel has is essentially an apartheid regime where they have this underclass that lives under a permanent military dictatorship. They're like a slave class. And by the way, they do work for them. They have no other choice to work anywhere else. So they go to work for Israelis, rich Israelis, and they have them there for cheap labor. So it's like this slave class that's under a military dictatorship. And so, and by the way, the state of Israel was really good friends with South Africa all during the apartheid period. They had all sorts of exchanges and cooperation with each other. And so South Africa remembers this. And now that they don't have apartheid anymore, they see, well, there's this state where the same thing that was done to us is going on. And that's why they actually took the initiative on this. Now, by the way, I'm not saying South Africa has been angelic. There have been some abuse of whites in South Africa also, and there's a battle going on in South Africa over this. So that's not to endorse everything South Africa says or does, but I'm just saying that this is an apartheid system, but it's a brutal, genocidal, terroristic apartheid system that's even worse, really, almost certainly worse than what the Afrikaner governments of South Africa imposed on blacks, in the 70s and 80s in South Africa. So that's why they initiated those suits.
There's so much passion on this side for it. There's passion for veiling kind of the truth of this matter. You mentioned in your article the Wall Street Journal, which is, of course, neocon, and
Mm-hmm.
it criticizes the Pope for him criticizing what's going on. And there's what you mentioned before, these kind of insinuating attacks in the sense that, oh, this is equating with Holocaust denial. You're essentially anti-Semitic. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
you're pointing this out. They do ad hominems. So what do you make of these neocons? Who is kind of behind this? You think that this neoconservative, is it? I don't know. Is it like a Protestant? Is it the Jews? I mean, I know I have friends in traditional realms. They always say, oh, the Jays, the Jays, and so there's a lot of stuff written out. Is there? Um, I think maybe is there kind of an overarching kind of like shadow, deep J, if you will, organization that that's controlling this, or like what's going on here with this?
But
Mhm.
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's not that there's a single organization, and it's not that it's all Jews, but yes, there's a very large number of Zionist Jews that are in they're in positions of power and influence in the United States. The wealthier Jewish class in the wealthier class of Jews in the United States were always the principal backers of Zionism, even before Zionism was accepted by Jews in general. And this is true to this day. And yes, they have massive influence over the media. Not only are they executives, but in many cases, they're the reporters, they're the owners, they're the stockholders. And also, though, let's take Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch is not Jewish. He owns Fox News, but he's a Zionist. He is married to a Jewish woman who's almost certainly a Zionist. I would assume she is, but I shouldn't say. I don't know. But I would think that she probably is, because he is a rabid Zionist, even though he's not Jewish. His family is not Jewish. So Zionism goes even beyond the Jews that are in these positions of power. But yes, it is a Jewish Zionist, but also Christian Zionists or just non-Jewish fellow traveler Zionists who are committed to this, and they're backed by incredible amounts of lobbying money from AIPAC, right? AIPAC is this lobbying group that was founded many decades ago and has bought out our Congress for decades. They either give you the carrot or the stick if you're in Congress. They expect you to take money from them, but then to unconditionally support Israel, or the stick, which is that they'll spend all this money trying to destroy your candidacy and to smear you as an anti-Semite or a bad person. And they're doing this right now, by the way, to Thomas Massie, who I think is from Tennessee. They tried to keep him out of office because he's one of the few Republicans, maybe the only one, who will clearly stand up to the Zionist lobby and refuses to vote to send money to Israel. And he says that all Republicans, by the way, have a Zionist handler, that they have someone from the AIPAC who is their handler, who constantly is in communication with them, telling them what AIPAC wants them to do. And AIPAC has hundreds of millions of dollars they spend during election years on these congressmen. And so, there's massive control because of the massive amount of money, but it's an investment. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars, and then what do they get back to the state of Israel? Tens of billions of dollars.
Right.
That's how much of our money is going to Israel.
Yeah.
And they seem to completely control Donald Trump. But Donald Trump, from just one Zionist donor, only one, she's this woman, I forget her name, but this one Zionist donor, she's Jewish, she gave him $100 million for his campaign. $100 million. Only I think Elon Musk gave more money to Donald Trump. And so, he seems to be completely beholden to them and will give them whatever they want. And now, after screaming and yelling that he's against, war, he's talking about going off to war with Israel. He's attacking the Houthis and he's depleting our munitions. This fruitless attack on the Houthis, who are only attacking Israeli shipping to try to stop them from starving the people of Gaza to death. Because, by the way, that's what's happening now. The people of Gaza are being starved and dehydrated to death because they're being denied food and water on a massive scale again, because Trump essentially goaded Israel into doing this. And also, of course, they're killing hundreds of them or dozens of them a day, 60, 70 in a day, just over and over again. Almost all of them, again, are civilians. And that's what's happening right now. So,
What do you say to the argument that that Israel has kind of, because I've heard this a lot, they have been very different, and even they wanted to promote a two-state solution by giving up a lot of land, by allowing elections, by basically wanting to have some type of peace deal that was kind of always disrupted in a certain way by the Palestinians. This is kind of what I hear from their side, that they've been always open to a two-state solution, but that it is Palestine who is not. I want to ask you that, and
yeah.
also what do you think about Trump's plan for Gaza to kind of revitalize it somehow, rebuild it and revitalize, which I don't know exactly if that's going to be an effective plan, like if he actually wants to do it, or it's just some idea he throws out there. But I was wondering what you thought about that also.
Well, I'll take that quickly. I mean, that's an ethnic cleansing plan. I mean, the Palestinians are to be removed, and it's to be turned into a real estate project that is going to be somehow owned by the United States. In other words, he just wants to grab someone's land, and that shouldn't be surprising because he's trying to coerce Greenland into being annexed by the United States, and the same even with Canada. So, I mean, Trump is turning, and I'm sorry to have to say this, I voted for him the second time. I didn't vote for him the first or the third time. I did vote for him the second time because I thought he was less bad than the other candidate. I never thought highly of him. But he's now just turning into an open fascist. I mean, a fascist is someone who arrogates to himself autocratic power at home and, engages in this aggressive nationalist imperialism abroad. And he's showing every sign of just being a classic fascist now. And I'm sorry to have to say that. And so your other question was about, I'm sorry,
The
what was the other one?
the Israeli argument that they have
Oh,
been
yes. Okay. Yeah.
concession.
The argument they've been offered so many chances. It's a bald-faced lie. I mean, every single case that they claim that they've been offered. For example, 1948. Oh, they were offered to have their own state. In fact, Israel never intended to, as I pointed out, never intended to conform to the partition plan, right? The plan itself was unjust, horribly unjust. It was going to give sovereignty over 55% of the land to only 30 something percent, 33% of the people, who are almost the vast majority of them had only arrived there extremely recently. It's just a bunch of people showed up and now they get sovereignty. But anyway, that they never intended to keep that themselves. They ethnically cleansed the Palestinians, and then they took even more land, 78%. So for them to talk about that and act like they actually intended to abide by that plan when they violated it from the very beginning is ridiculous. And also in every other case where, if you look into these claims, what they did is they would make these vague, bogus offers, and then when they sat down to talk about what they were going to actually let them have, it essentially would be very little different from what's on the West Bank right now, for example. You have a Palestinian Authority that theoretically has control within certain zones on the West Bank, but those zones are surrounded by all this barbed wire and roads that are controlled by Israel. Israel would have controlled their airspace if they would have no more sovereignty than the people in the Palestinian Authority areas do on the West Bank right now, which is essentially zero. I mean, even in the Warsaw Ghetto, Jews actually ruled themselves in the Warsaw Ghetto. I don't know if people know that, but the Nazis didn't have their own governing officials in the Warsaw Ghetto. They actually, there were Jewish officials that were ruling it. But did that mean that these people were free? These Jews in Poland were free? No, of course not. And that would have been the same thing. So what they did is they would constantly sabotage the negotiations and make them offers that were horribly bad offers, and then claim, oh, we were so generous, and it was all a lie. It's always been a lie. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah, interesting stuff. I mean, for sure, there's a lot of history behind it. There's a lot of context to do, but definitely what's happening now, I think little by little, people are turning towards being, wait a minute, Palestinians are suffering a lot. This is definitely disproportionate. And
Yeah.
and
Now I want to add this really quickly.
yeah,
53% of Americans now, and this is very unprecedented. Americans tended to support Israel very strongly. 53% now say in polls that they have a negative image of the state of Israel.
wow, yeah. Yeah, and the very patriarch of Jerusalem. I mean, a man who's out there, I mean, suffering ultimately, who's the leader of the Christians out there, and even Orthodox too. The Orthodox, the Holy Family is that an Orthodox church or is that a
No,
Catholic?
that's a Catholic church. That's a Catholic church.
But I believe the Orthodox also
Yes,
they were bombed. Their church
absolutely.
destroyed by
Yeah.
bombs. So.
Hmm.
All right. Well, I'll give you the last word. Besides that, thanks for coming on. I mean, I'm going to put the link to the article on the bottom, and I hope to have you more for other interesting articles. Now, this is interesting because Crisis Magazine, this is an opinion piece, right? So this is not like one of the every day they have two articles, I believe, right? So this is how do you if you go to the home page of Crisis Magazine, is there like a section on the bottom for opinion? Because or is it like one of
Yeah,
the
or analysis and opinion, maybe yes,
okay,
but it's not on the front page anymore. This was a couple of weeks ago, so
right?
it's not even on the front page now.
That's
So
right.
we would need to. They could type my name, Matthew Hoffman, and then type Crisis magazine.
See that.
And I've had a couple of articles with them over the years, like 3 different articles. This is my latest. It'll come up very easily.
No, definitely. I'll just put the link on the bottom, so it's not a problem. You can just click right to it, check out this article and his other articles, and yeah. Well, thanks for coming on. I'll give you the last word if you want to say anything else.
Well, no, just to thank you really for giving me this. It's sort of an extended interview, which I did ask you to extend it a little bit, so because because I said
Well,
there's so much to this,
there is.
and I just thank you for taking the time with it and to be open to hearing about this, especially given that there's a lot of fear surrounding just the issue, and people are even afraid to talk about it. And it's so important that we break the silence and teach people the history of what's happened, because the average Catholic, I mean, if he's got good values, he would certainly change his view on the situation in the Middle East, and particularly in Israel and the Palestinian territories.
That's right. And I mean, our ideals have to be guided by reality, not the other way around. So it's the Catholic has to have that objectivity, right?
Mhm.
And the Catholics do, right? They should at least. Well, thank you for coming on. God
Thank you.
bless. And yeah, until next time, we'll see you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
God bless.